Welcome to Ginny's, where East meets West, and a slice of Eastern philosophy becomes a part of Western thinking. I'm your host, Ginny Gong. Today's show focuses on efforts in the Asian and Pacific Islander community to encourage civic participation. Both guests have used blogging as a means of keeping the community informed and invested. My first guest is a community advocate who has worked on issues pertaining to Asian Americans for the last 3 decades. She is a former civil rights attorney and the creator of Hues Blog, a new blog site that will showcase diverse peoples, their stories, and encourage action. She strives to give a voice to the voiceless and build bridges. To that end, she has been involved with several nonprofits and initiatives both on the local and national levels. She is a founding member of Communities Against Hate, a Montgomery County Public School parent advisory group called the Asian Pacific American Student Achievement Action Group, and is a former board chair of the Montgomery Coalition for Adult English Language Literacy. She was recently named as one of Maryland's top 100 women by the Daily Record. Join me in welcoming Aryani Ong. Welcome, Aryani.
Thank you, Ginny.
What an honor to be named by the Record.
Yes, I was very privileged.
Yeah, wonderful. Very proud of you. Let's begin by talking a little bit about how did you get involved and interested in Asian American issues?
Well, I became interested very early on, and it would crystallize in a single moment, believe it or not, back in 1982.
You remember that?
I do remember that. I was a young teen, and I immediately recognized the significance of Americans of Asian descent coalescing into the quote-unquote Asian American community, for the purposes of political representation. And what happened was that I was watching TV when I saw that a judge had refused to appropriately punish 2 automotive workers who had committed a hate crime murder against a Chinese American man by the name of Vincent Chin, whom they had mistaken as a Japanese American. And they had been caught up with the toxic political rhetoric at the time where people had blamed Japan, for the loss of U.S. jobs.
Right. I mean, that was a case to be remembered because we weren't even there at that time. So, I can understand why that would have such a major impact.
We were Orientals. We were called Orientals at that time. And I think that what really struck a chord with the Asian American community is that the judge fined these men $3,000 in time served, no more time in jail, because he said they weren't the kind of people who would go to jail. So intuitively, even as a young teen, I understood that we needed to mobilize just to protect our rights and privileges.
So what did you do when that happened, when you saw that? What was your first action?
Actually, to tell you the truth, as someone who lived in Texas and who had no other role models, at the time on TV, the only Asian faces I saw were in a laundry commercial. I started to feel despair, but at that very moment, I saw an advocate by the name of Helen Zia, who is the face of that case and later the movement, and I saw my path forward.
Wow. Well, we all know Helen Zia and the role she has played in the movement. Let's talk a little bit about the strengths and the challenges for the community in terms of civil rights and Asian Americans. What do you see?
Well, I think the strengths is that the Vincent Chin case had sparked the modern-day Asian American civil rights movement, and it inspired a number of institutions, nonprofit organizations that provide direct services, legal aid to communities all over the country, and eventually there were national organizations that started popping up in Washington, D.C. So for the past 25 years, those organizations I've seen grown from 8 to 12 to now about 35.
Right. I guess we had to be angry, right? I mean, I think maybe movements don't go anywhere until you're really angry. Do you think there's some truth to that? I mean, we have to be angry at what happened in that case in order for all of these organizations to form.
I do feel that all these disparate ethnic groups probably wouldn't have come together in this political construct had it not been for the fact that we realized that we didn't have the strength in numbers. And so we coalesced as the Asian American community. And it's usually an external pressure that brings that together. But happily now, we have things like the Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, where we celebrate our culture and our heritage.
So what about weaknesses? I mean, obviously, that helped galvanize the community, but what keeps us sort of still, in the background?
Yes, so there are challenges,
Yeah.
and I had alluded earlier to the diversity of the ethnic groups. There are about 50 of them, and they span 100 languages, so it's sort of hard to negotiate a common platform.
Right.
I think there's varying levels of readiness, too, of the community to engage in civic participation, because 2/3 of the community are still primarily first-generation immigrants. So they're still trying to, settle down. And then there's mundane, reasons like scarce funding, for example.
So communities who came, decades ago or have been here longer are much more acculturated and able to participate, whereas the more immigrant communities are still sort of staying together.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, Japanese Americans, because of that, the tragic experience of incarceration camps, they were the role models in the civil rights movement, but now they're aging.
Yeah.
And then we had the Filipinos who were unionizing as well. And so now there's an emergence of new immigrants, but to a certain extent, they also have to learn the history.
Right.
The Asian American history, and then become acclimated even to the idea of being Asian American. It's a foreign, construct for them.
So you have been sort of working on behalf of the voiceless in the community. Who are they in your mind?
So primarily I work to give voice to Asian Americans because I still recall, again as recent as the 1980s and arguably even today, that mainstream society is still grappling with accepting Asian Americans as full-fledged Americans.
Right.
So I focus on promoting diversity and inclusion, and conversely to address the spectrum of discrimination ranging from stereotypes to hate crimes.
Yeah.
I also look out for immigrants and minorities and women and children.
Why do you think they don't see us as full-fledged Americans?
I think that because of the American history really evolved out of a black and white paradigm, and so as a country we're still grappling with that. And so it wasn't even until like the 1980s that people had to think hard, especially at the Vincent Chin case. Does federal civil rights law apply to Asian Americans?
Right,
I mean, lawyers were actually trying to figure out if that was true.
Right.
So I think it's the recency of our arrival, but we're making progress.
Yeah. So the advancement of any community has a lot to do with their participation in the political process, ability to vote, all of that. And I know you've been involved in some political campaigns. Tell us about that experience.
So I actually hadn't been that involved in politics except for back in 1992. I was involved as a staffer with a presidential campaign, and then as a local officer with the Asian American Political Alliance. But it was the 2016 elections that got me back into the game. So as you mentioned, I was involved in 2 campaigns, and one was for Lily Chi, who ran as state delegate, and
she's an Asian American.
Yes. She became the first Chinese immigrant woman to hold a seat in the state legislature. And then Huan Dang, who was running for Montgomery County Council, a body that hasn't yet seen an Asian American council member.
Amazing, right? After all these years, as progressive as Montgomery County is, that's not a good testimonial, right? Is the community advancing forward, though, Aryani? Do you see positive signs?
I do. I see now a backbone of organizations that dot the country, and they serve Asian American communities at the national, state, and local level. There's a web of connections, too, that allow people to share information and collaborate and mobilize people.
So a lot of your work has been on legislative advocacy and community education around hate crimes, and I know that you were involved in working on guidelines. Tell us about your work with, what is it, the Coalition United Against Hate?
Communities United Against Hate.
Oh, communities.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All right.
So if I can backtrack a little bit, So addressing hate crimes has actually been the mainstay of my professional career. So out of law school, I went to work as a civil rights attorney with the National Civil Rights Organization, and there I advocated to strengthen federal hate crime law and spoke to different audiences. And actually overseas too, I addressed the UN Committee to Eliminate Racial Discrimination, and worked with partner organizations to publish a report that tracked violence against Asian Americans.
Just Asian Americans?
Just Asian Americans. It was the only report nationally to do so. And then later at OCA National, I wrote a community response guide, which is actually probably the first or second in the entire field.
Wow.
Yes.
And it was published and it's available?
It is. It is.
Okay.
But after 2016, as the media report showed, there was an uptick in hate crimes and incidents. So locally, with other founders, we created a 30-plus member coalition called the Communities United Against Hate. And their mission is to address hate and bigotry and also to promote diversity and inclusion.
Now, is that a local or a national effort?
It's a county-wide.
Oh, county-wide.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about the organization McHale as the last question, since I'm running out of time here. I know you were involved as the chair of that organization. What was its mission?
So the mission of McHale is to strengthen and to promote adult English literacy services across the county in service of workforce development, and also to improve the quality of life for residents, particularly immigrants. Did you know that the county is home to 40% of the state's immigrant population?
Oh, I know. I used to live here.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Aryani, you've done so many wonderful things in the community. I want to thank you, but I want to personally thank you for your work in helping me when I was writing my autobiography back in 2008. Your understanding of the community and your excellent writing skills was really very critical in terms of that. I want to acknowledge your work with that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being a role model yourself, Ginny.
Oh, wow. Okay, it's time for us to take a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Every book is an adventure waiting to come to life. Visit new worlds. Encounter new friends. And discover the power of reading. Go to read.gov to read A Princess of Mars, the first novel to feature John Carter. A new world awaits. Read.
A boy born in Joplin, Missouri was fascinated by anything with wheels and a motor. The odds of him winning both the Daytona 500 and the Brickyard 400 in the same year? 1 in 195 million. The odds of the child being diagnosed with autism? 1 in 110. I'm Jamie McMurray, and my niece has autism.
Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs.
Yeah, salad on Saturday, fruit on Friday, throw a ball Thursday.
Water Wednesday, touch your toes Tuesday. Let's move Monday, swap us next Sunday.
60 minutes of physical activity a day and eating well can help get your child healthy. So keep them active and eating well every day. Get ideas, get involved, get going at letsmove.gov. That's letsmove.gov.
Welcome back to Ginny's, where East meets West. My next guest is a strategic communications consultant and creator of the Politics Within Politics blog, featured on Montgomery Community Media, exploring the issues related to the intersection of American politics, race, and gender has been a significant focus in her research and articles, some of which appeared in sources such as the Harvard Asian American Policy Review. Her public policy experience stems from her tenure working on Capitol Hill. She started her career interning in the office of Senator Barack Obama and serving former Congressman Javier Becerra during his previous vice chairmanship of the House Democratic Caucus. She played leadership roles in 3 political campaigns and is a commissioner with the Montgomery County Commission for Women. Please welcome Tonia Bui. Welcome, Tonia.
Hi, Ginny. Good to be here.
Congratulations on your appointment to the commission.
Thank you so much.
Well, let's begin by finding out, how did this interest in community building begin?
So my interest in community building actually began during my college years at UC Berkeley. And during that time, I met a young woman named Min Dang, and she was a survivor of sex trafficking, and her parents had sold her into prostitution. During the same time, the local Berkeley News was covering a story about a sex trafficking incident that was happening across the street from my dormitory. Wow. And I felt like there was a need to take action. And so I collaborated with my friend Min to start an anti-human trafficking movement on campus.
Wow.
And
what year were you in?
That was my second year.
Oh my goodness.
Sophomore year. And so that was my entryway into coalition building. And so we worked with other survivors, we worked with the law enforcement, advocates in the community to really build a campaign around changing a California State Assembly bill to make sure law enforcement had the training that they need to identify victims of human trafficking who are U.S. citizens. And so all of that work really set the foundation for my career here in Washington, D.C.
So you did this while you were going to school?
Yes.
Getting involved in advocacy. Did you have any time for work, schoolwork?
I loved it. I loved it so much. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what did you major in?
I studied gender and also mass communications.
Wow.
So I was able to build the bridge between those 2 fields to do the work that I did.
Well, I know that you're a blogger.
Yes.
So how did you get started in blogging? And, why blogging? Why not some other way?
Yeah. So you did mention my piece in the Harvard Asian American Policy Review, and that was a commentary. But I had so much more to say about the intersection of race, gender, and politics. Yeah. So I thought blogging would be that opportunity to continue the conversation and to meet other women who are working on the same cause and try to understand better why we need more diversity on political campaigns, particularly to have women to work on campaigns.
Now, does blogging target a particular population, sector of the population? I mean, I guess in my mind, I'm thinking, to really understand blogging, you have to be tech savvy. Maybe it's really not the right thing for seniors. Am I way off?
Well, the unique
I
thing,
am way off, right?
Well, the unique thing about blogging is that you can brand and you can choose a niche market or whatever topic that you feel you're most passionate about, and that's why I love to blog. I'm able to write what I love. And picking back off your question about whether it targets a certain demographic, and your point is valid that it might not reach an audience who might not be online or social media because it is housed on an online platform.
Right.
But looking at the statistics of my blogger audience, it turns out they're women over 55.
Wow.
So yeah, so it's telling me that there's a generation, actually an older generation, trying to seek information using the internet. And I have seen that when you do a simple Google search now, sometimes certain topics show up and it'll fall under a blog. So I see blogging as just an alternative resource to information.
Right, and you can post it quite easily, and you can take it down easily, as opposed to writing an article, right, for a journal or something, and it has a total process.
Yes, definitely, and you do use certain platforms. There are lots of platforms out there, and you can be creative, and unlike working for a news outlet, such as in print journalism, you don't have to work on a deadline or fall into sensational headlines. You kind of work on your own pace, and I'm able to really build relationships with other bloggers too in this field.
Well, you mentioned that article you wrote, and I was going to ask you later on, but let's talk about it now.
Sure.
You wrote this article about the intersection of gender and politics. What are some of your findings? Because obviously this is a core of what you're most interested in.
Yes. I think what I wanted to convey was that we need more Asian Americans in particular to work in politics, but in particular more women of color to work in political campaigns, because I think there are stereotypes and we're siloed into certain positions, like women are only supposed to be the secretary, or they're only known to do certain roles that are designated, traditionally known for women. And I think a lot of the times when I was helping managing a race, people asked, oh, are you the intern? Are you the political candidate's wife? And I think that really frustrated me, that people had a vision in mind of what a campaign manager looked like.
Yeah.
And so I think that really hit something for me, and I ran into all kinds of barriers where I couldn't find other campaign staff who were familiar with minority outreach. So that was something very difficult to navigate, to find the right staff who understood the outreach techniques to minority constituents.
Well, how well represented are we in, minorities in terms of this whole political arena?
So I think you raise a great question, and the answer is we do need more representation. And that's because the data is showing, in terms of population trends for Asian Americans, we're the fastest growing population right now. And so over time, within the next decade, and even 2, 3, 4 decades from now, we'll need more Asian Americans to represent at the federal, state, and local level as well.
Yeah. But if you take it not just Asian American, how about as women? How are we well represented? Are there enough women elected to office?
So we're seeing a trend in the so-called wave right now of so many women running for president, but then we also saw a wave of women who were elected. And I think the data is showing that women are more likely to be elected at the federal level, but right now at the state and local level, there could be a stronger pipeline for those offices as well.
So why do you think that that's the case? Why at the federal? I would think at the local level it would be easier for women to be successful, but I think you're saying that that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and I think there are still barriers that are traditionally tied to women. So having money and how to ask for money. I think also having time management and dealing with the family dynamic too. Those are real conversations to have, and whether to have also the resources and the tools. And even like looking at it in the context of like when I was growing up, the skill sets that you really need to even be on a campaign, you need to learn to network. You need to be able to build relationships and be vocal. And I think sometimes that's out of our comfort zone a little bit as being Asian American to be in a political space.
Asking for money is really hard.
Yes.
I can't do that very easily.
Yes.
And I know that that's something you really have to be able to do.
Yes.
Well, I just discussed with Aryani, who was in the first half of the show, about how important it is for the community to be involved in the political process. So I know that you've played key roles in 3 campaigns. So tell us about that experience. I know 2 of the campaigns were for Asian Americans, and 1 was for a woman. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what about those? What do you come out of having worked in those campaigns?
So the common theme that came out from all the campaigns I've worked on has been focused on doing Asian American outreach and the emphasis on not only voter turnout, but voter registration.
Right.
And I also mentioned earlier that I think that there's still a lack of diverse staff working on political campaigns to do the equipped outreach that's needed. And so there's a lot of like dynamics in play and the tension between political parties and top down, what type of outreach can be done, and really having questions about race. Is he too visible in one community group, or is she too visible in another? And so it's always that fine line. And you mentioned that I have worked on 2 Asian American races, Asian American candidates, and those races in particular. The first one was for my friend Hung Nguyen, who ran for the House of Delegates in Virginia.
In Virginia,
Yep. And
he's Vietnamese.
Yes, he's Vietnamese American, and it was a tough district. And I really learned about balancing strategies in a way to leverage what you don't have, right? And so the challenge that we couldn't get press hits in mainstream media, so we had to leverage ethnic media.
I see.
Yeah, so that was an eye-opener for me in terms of positioning him in a way that seemed that he wasn't Asian American.
That's sad, right?
I ran into that challenge.
Right.
Yeah, but serendipitously, I actually met my husband on that race. My husband is Juan Dang, and he ran for the Montgomery County Council at large. And
we love Juan.
oh, thank you.
Just a little plug in there.
Yeah, and so that race was nothing like I've ever experienced because I wore so many different hats. Not only was I the political candidate's wife, but I played the communication strategist. I helped him fundraise money. I was his treasurer as well. So it was an eye-opener, and I would say that working on the previous races that I've worked on really taught me about how to be a political operative, but that race taught me a lot about leadership and how I work with people.
Now, I'm running out of time, and I know that when you were an intern, you worked in the office of Senator Barack Obama. And I know everybody wants to know, what was he like, right, in 30 seconds?
I would say he's very humble in person, and so he is not ashamed to thank you in public. And I think I have a lot of leaders I guess I look up to, and I think to be able to thank your staff is something that I admire, and the philosophy that I adapt wherever I go when I work in public policy.
And he was that kind of person?
Yes.
That he would come up to you and thank you?
Yes.
And this was when he was a senator?
Yes.
Wow, well, you have a very rare experience there. 2-second question, are you going to run for office?
Oh my gosh, everybody asks that, Ginny, but to let you know, I think that I'm a strong believer in the philosophy that in order to make change, you should work in the places and in the systems that make change, and I have done that through my career in Capitol Hill and working in the federal government.
And you'll continue to do that.
Yes.
Well, Tonia, I want to thank you for your contributions to the community. That concludes our show for today. Special thanks to my guests, Aryani and Tonia Bui, for their commitment to community engagement. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Stay well, and we'll see you next time.